Hey flutists! In today's video we're going to talk about basic articulation on the Western flute. Articulation refers to the diction of the sound, or in other words, how the sound begins. In most Western traditional, classical, orchestral, and solo flute playing, we want that diction, or the start of the sound, to be very clear and precise. That's not true for all genres, especially when we're dealing with extended techniques and things along those lines. However, more often than not, that's the type of sound we want with our diction, so that's what we'll talk about today. In addition to the airstream itself and the embouchure, or our flute face, there are two things that are most important to consider when working on your articulation. The first is the shape and position of the tip of the tongue, and the second is the shape and position of the rest of the tongue. There are a lot of different schools of thought out there as to how to produce the best and clearest articulation. However, it's important to remember that each individual is different, and your physical setup, your lips, your jaw, and everything inside are different. When you're learning how to articulate, it is important to let your ears be the judge. You should experiment with different tongue positions while listening critically to yourself to see which produces the clearest sound. Let's talk about the tip of the tongue. When articulating on the flute, you want the tip of the tongue to be controlled, narrow, and pointed and focused. Two of the most common consonants that produce good diction on the flute include D as in the letter D and T as in the letter T. Take a moment now to produce both sounds and be critically aware of the shape of the tip of your tongue. For me, the D sound makes my tongue feel more narrowed, pointed, and focused in the front, where the T sound is close but not quite as focused. However, either consonant is fine. Again, let your ears be the guide. Now for the rest of the tongue. There are two main vowels that produce good articulation. The first is E and the second is U. Keep in mind when we talk about these different vowels, we are only talking about the change in the shape and position of your tongue, not your lips. No matter which tongue position you choose, your embouchure, your flute face, should be firm and set and consistent. If you create the E sound now, E, you should be able to feel that the tongue is raised, more neutral, flat and wide across the mouth. You might feel it against the inside of your teeth or even resting a little bit on the top of your bottom teeth. A more neutral tongue position such as this is good for passages with rapid articulation because the tip of the tongue won't have a far distance to go to create the diction of the sound. If you create the oo sound, oo, you should be able to feel a more dropped position in the mouth. The tongue is kind of scooped and maybe resting on the bottom of your mouth a little more. This creates a bigger space in the oral cavity. While the tip of the tongue will now have further to go to create the diction, do or to, this is very good for heavy, accented, or weighty type of articulation. Putting it all together, we now have 4 different positions to experiment with: D and T and do and to. I always encourage students to experiment with all 4. Rely on your ears and the feedback of your teacher to see which setup produces the clearest articulation for you. It's important to remember that your airstream, its speed, direction, and presence are the motor for your sound. When learning articulation, it can be easy to accidentally rely too heavily on the tongue to create the sound. To help address this, I usually have students begin articulation by holding a sustained pitch, articulating that pitch, and continuing to toggle back and forth between sustaining a note and articulating it. Working this way will help someone become critically aware as to whether or not there are any unintended or undesired changes in the airspeed or pressure between the sustained note and the articulated pitches. For example, when done well, there's no change in the airspeed or pressure. All that's happening on the articulated notes is I'm allowing my tongue to interrupt my airstream. This exercise can also be done on the head joint alone for a student who may only be on the head joint or may prefer to work this way. Articulation exercises like this can also be incorporated into other typical warm-up activities, like scales. Everything we have talked about so far addresses single tonguing. Single tonguing is good for slow up to moderately fast passages. Anything faster than that, and you might need to rely on double tonguing or triple tonguing. Both double and triple tonguing rely on a back consonant that alternates with our front consonant. Just as we can produce our front consonant for single tonguing with the d or t sound, we can produce the back consonant with the k, the k, or the g sound. Either are fine, but personally I prefer d-gi. I find the gi sound clearer and easy to articulate. That back syllable is usually weaker and it's hard to get a clear sound, so that firm constant airstream is extra important for double and triple tonguing. A student can begin practicing double and triple tonguing in the same way they did single tonguing, alternating between a sustained pitch and articulated pitches. For example, double tonguing or triple tonguing. Again, just like with single tonguing, these can be done on the head joint or with scales and other warm-up activities. I hope this video was able to help give you some good tips and pointers on articulating on the flute. If you have any additional suggestions for producing good articulation on the flute, please feel free to comment below. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching.